अस्सलामुअलैकुम माय फ्रेंड्स, कैसे हैं आप? उम्मीद करता हूँ सब खैरियत से होंगे। वेलकम बैक माय यूट्यूब चैनल। मैं हूं मोहम्मद उस्मान। आज मेरे साथ बैठे हैं
मोहम्मद यूसुफ।
आप देख रहे हैं देसी रिएक्शन रैंडम। आज की वीडियो का हम रिएक्शन लेकर आए हैं। वीडियो काफी इंटरेस्टेड, काफी एक्साइटेड है। वीडियो का टाइटल आपको बता देते हैं। वीडियो का टाइटल है व्हाई इंडोनेशिया इज मूविंग देयर कैपिटल सिटी। वाओ, व्हाई इंडोनेशिया इज मूविंग फास्ट मूविंग द कैपिटल सिटी, द बिग सिटी। तो वीडियो का टाइटल आपको बता रहे। वीडियो को स्टार्ट करने से पहले रिक्वेस्ट है कि हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें, वीडियो को लाइक करें, शेयर करें एंड कमेंट में बताएं कि रिएक्शन कैसा लगा था। वीडियो को स्टार्ट करते हैं। लेट्स स्टार्ट।
Country's capital city is one of the most important choices for any nation's leaders to make. They contain important government facilities, offices, and headquarters, and usually contain the primary residence of the nation's leadership. The capital city is basically the brain of a country, and choosing the location of where you want to place your brain is, of course, a highly strategic choice. Most often, the best location for a capital city is somewhere that can be easily defended, and from where you can exert control and project unity over the rest of the country. Capitals need to be seen as representative of the entire nation and be easily accessible to the largest number of people possible. And for all those reasons, capitals are most often built within the center of a country. But sometimes, the choice of an old location ends up eventually just not working out. For example, in 2005, Myanmar moved their capital city away from Old Yangon, the largest city in the country, and towards Naypyidaw, more than 300 kilometers to the north. This was done because Naypyidaw is more centrally located within the country than Yangon was, and it was also a transportation hub located right next to three chronically turbulent and rebellious states. And so it was felt that the presence of the capital and the military so nearby would help to improve the region's stability. And further, it was ruled that the old capital of Yangon was simply more vulnerable to climate disasters since it was located directly on the coast. As was showcased in 2008 when a cyclone smashed directly into it and destroyed 3/4 of the city's infrastructure. In a similar manner, Brazil also moved their capital city back in 1960 away from the historical but by then overcrowded Rio de Janeiro on the coast and towards a deeper and more centralized location within the Brazilian interior that they ended up calling Brasilia. This decision was largely made in order to encourage inward growth away from the coast and to make the capital city more regionally neutral. And then, of course, there was the Great Showdown in Australia back in 1927, when neither Sydney nor Melbourne could agree on which city should become the nation's capital, and thus they ended up compromising by building Canberra roughly in between them from scratch. Now, in the year 2022, there are two very large modern countries who are actively in the process of relocating their capital cities for pretty familiar reasons. Egypt is relocating their capital away from Cairo towards a newer, planned city still under construction a bit over to the east, while Indonesia is relocating their capital city away from Jakarta and moving it more than 1,000 kilometers away to a completely different island. This is incredibly significant because Indonesia itself is an incredibly significant country. She has the 4th highest population of any country in the world, lagging only behind China, India, and the United States, and boasts more than 270 million people. For such a large country, however, Indonesia is rather unique because while China, India, and the United States are all major and generally contiguous continental powers, Indonesia is really about 17,000 totally separate islands all scattered apart from each other. And these islands are not equal. There's 5 big land areas that Indonesia controls. The entire islands of Sumatra, Java, and Sulawesi, and half of the big islands of Borneo and New Guinea. However, 4 of these island territories are fairly sparsely populated, while the thousands of smaller islands add little to the overall population as well. By and large, that leaves the island of Java, which alone is home to more than 60% of the entire Indonesian population, 145 million people. This makes Java by far the world's most populated island, with even more people than Russia, a country that is 123 times larger. And so it's pretty fair to say that this island is basically the center of Indonesia's population and culture. And so naturally, the capital of Indonesia has been located in Jakarta for a very long time, and it's located right here, Jakarta. Jakarta has been a pretty major city for centuries, but with little fanfare in the modern 21st century world, the city's metropolitan population has skyrocketed to a population of around 35 million people, which makes Jakarta the 2nd largest urban area in the entire world after only Tokyo.
Jakarta
which,
is
as fate would have
capital.
it, is also located on another island. Besides serving as the
Wow,
capital
I
of
think this is
Indonesia, Jakarta is
Jakarta.
also the
It's
diplomatic
Galati
capital
Road,
of
okay?
ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast
Right.
Asian Nations,
Right.
which is
Oh.
effectively Southeast Asia's version of the European Union, and so you can sort of think of Jakarta's role
I
here
think
as
ये
being
लग
similar
तो
to
Jakarta
Brussels
ही
in
है.
Europe. Jakarta is an
all
enormously
countries'
important
flag.
and significant
All
global
countries'
city,
flag.
but
Yes,
it
this
is
is one of
not
the
without
beautiful,
problems that make it
मुझे तो
actually a
इंडोनेशिया और
not
मलेशिया
so
के flag का
favorable
पता है.
location for Indonesia's capital city
Look
in
in
the
China.
21st century. For one, as I mentioned previously, there is a
Beautiful,
lot of inequality
river,
within the
small
country.
river.
While Java is home to 60% of Indonesia's population, the island only makes up
Indonesia.
7% of
ये
Indonesia's
इंडोनेशिया के बारे में
land.
बता रहे हैं.
Ultimately, that means that the
Oh.
remaining 93% of the country's landmass, over on the 17,000 other islands, are pretty underrepresented both in terms of population and in economics. While the economy in both Jakarta and Java has been growing tremendously over the past few decades, the other islands have been more or less economically left behind and have remained
ये वर्ल्ड
fairly
का जो
stagnant. To illustrate this
पूरी
point,
दुनिया का
ever
जो
since
मैप है वो बता रहे हैं
1971,
उसके
Java
ऊपर
has
बता रहे
gained
हैं.
75 million people, while Sumatra has only gained
Wow.
38 million.
जो ये
Kalimantan,
काफी
what the Indonesian
fast
side of Borneo is
grow
called,
में है
only
ना,
11
ये
million.
fast
Sulawesi
moving
only
जो
about
आगे
10 million,
capital
while Western New Guinea
जाके
only
होता है.
gained 4 million.
Yeah.
And while these
बता
other
रहे हैं.
islands may look close by on a map like this,
ये
they
बिल्कुल
really
मैप पे वो
aren't.
बता
If
रहे
you
हैं.
place the islands of Indonesia
जा
over
रहे हैं.
Europe, with Java placed roughly over northern Italy, you'd quickly see that Kalimantan is as far
West
away as
Indians.
northern Germany and
ये
Poland.
सबसे
Sulawesi
ज़्यादा
is
जाया
over in
जाया की
Belarus and
population
Ukraine,
सबसे ज़्यादा है
while
ना.
Western New Guinea is
Wow.
way over in
Jaya.
Kazakhstan. A lot of these places are very far away from Jakarta and are therefore isolated and remote from the center of power, often across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Based exclusively on the
The big
centralization of
population
power
there.
factor, it would make
Wow,
the most sense
क्या
from a
चीज़ है
geographic
यार,
perspective to place
माशाल्लाह.
Indonesia's
Beautiful,
capital within either
very
Kalimantan or
nice,
Borneo
beautiful
or
city
on
and the
Sulawesi.
Allah की
But of
mountain.
course,
Mountain,
centralization
mashallah.
alone is not usually a good enough reason to
Beautiful
go
area.
through all of these moving pains. The larger motivations are that Jakarta itself has a lot of issues. To start, the city has experienced a tremendous amount of urban growth in the past few decades. Back in 1945, at the beginning of the Second World War, the city's population was only 600,000
Wow,
people.
Jakarta.
25 years later, by
Beautiful
1970, the city's
Jakarta.
population
Yes,
had
I
increased
think
by
it's
six-fold
Jakarta.
to more than
Looking-
4 million.
Yeah,
And then
old
50
picture.
years later from then, by
Old
2020,
picture.
it had more than
Yes.
doubled again to more than
Beautiful,
10.5 million within the
Wow.
boundaries of the city proper,
Amazing
largely owing to
and
massive
beautiful
internal
picture.
migration from
पुरानी
the rest of
pictures
Indonesia.
है.
As a result of all
Yes.
this growth, the city has been experiencing a
Jakarta ने बहुत
substantial
तरक्की की है.
ecological breakdown,
Indonesia
accompanied
ने.
by intensely gridlocked traffic and congestion.
Wow.
Nearly
A
4.5
big city.
million cars and more
Oh,
than 13
big
million
city, big,
motorcycles
eh?
are used on the city's
Yeah.
streets,
This
while
one is
public
not
transportation
good.
only accounts for a third of the city's commuters.
Dirty,
To exacerbate the
big
pollutants from
dirty.
all these vehicles,
Yes.
there are
बड़ा
7
सा देश
existing
का कचरे का.
coal-fired power plants and 5 more planned
सफाई
plants, all
वाला
within a 100-kilometer radius of the city. The emissions from those 5 planned
System
plants
अच्छा नहीं है
alone
उनका.
will eventually be equal to adding 10 million additional cars to Jakarta's already crowded streets. Given this, air pollution and smog within the city is a serious
Oh
issue,
my
and it generally
God.
ranks alongside
I
cities like
think,
New Delhi and
pollutions,
Beijing. The air quality can get
eh,
so
smoking,
bad that just last year in
काफी high
2021,
level का है,
172 days were considered too unhealthy to be outside, which was more than half of the entire year. And then, of course, there's the traffic itself. Jakarta has often been named the world's worst city for traffic on multiple occasions and multiple publications. But here are some ways to put it all in perspective. It's been estimated before that the average Jakarta resident will spend 10 years of their lifetime there in traffic. The largest satellite city of Jakarta, where many downtown office workers live, is Bogor, 25 miles away from the Jakarta core. Under normal Jakarta traffic conditions, it usually takes 2 hours to drive across those 25 miles. And when the conditions are considered bad,
beautiful
it
road.
can take more like 3 hours.
Jakarta.
It's gotten so bad that high-ranking
Jakarta
government
is
officials have to
Jakarta.
regularly be escorted by police convoys
Beautiful.
through the city just to arrive at their meetings on time. And to make matters even
Bogus?
worse, Jakarta's
Bogus.
population is still
Bogus.
growing. By 2030, it's
City
projected that there will be more than 40 million people living within the metropolitan area,
Oh,
more than
traffic-
the entire population of
traffic
Canada,
policy.
and causing it to
Uh-huh.
surpass even Tokyo to become the
The
world's
control
newest,
our
largest
traffic
city.
policy.
But out of all of Jakarta's many
Indonesian
problems,
policy.
it's water
Yes.
that is the most severe. As with many coastal cities across the world, Jakarta is not unique in dealing with the
PNM.
threat of rising sea levels.
I would
But
say-
Jakarta's specific situation is rather unique because on top of dealing with sea levels rising, the city is simultaneously sinking. Jakarta's sinking problem is very similar to both Mexico City and Venice, both of which I've made videos about in the past, but this is the gist. Just like both of those cities, Jakarta was established within a swampy environment many centuries ago before the needs of modern cities were at all understood. 13 rivers flow through the city, which used to provide ample fresh water, but now are wildly polluted and currently unusable for drinking water. Jakarta does have a series of water pipes, but they only reach about 60% of the population, and they're all highly concentrated in the more wealthy areas of South and Central Jakarta. As for the millions of other people who don't have any access, ground pumping is basically the only means of obtaining any fresh water for themselves. But of course, as this water beneath the surface is removed, the soil above will continue to compact and sink. And it doesn't help that nowadays there are dozens of massive and heavy concrete and steel skyscrapers across the city's surface, adding even more weight and pressure, pushing down onto the fragile soil below. As a result of all these contributing factors, the entirety of Jakarta is now sinking into the ground by about 1 centimeter a year. But there are some areas seeing as much as 25 centimeters of sinking a year. When you take rising sea levels into consideration, it's easy to see why most of the city will very shortly be in grave danger. And while floods are already a chronic problem that the city faces, it's nothing compared to what might happen in the future. The entire city rests within a flat basin, and according to some estimates, 40% of Jakarta is already sitting beneath sea level, while many others predict by 2050, only 28 short years from now, the entire city proper of more than 10.6 million people will be buried beneath the sea like a modern-day Atlantis, assuming that nothing is actually done about it. But of course, there is a plan to do something about it, and it's insane. In 2014, the Indonesian government revealed the plans for what they called Giant Seawall Jakarta, expected to be completed by 2025. The plan will eventually construct a titanically sized seawall across the entirety of Jakarta Bay to protect the city from the ocean beyond. The wall is planned to be constructed in the form of a Garuda, a giant legendary bird from the Hindu and Buddhist faiths that is also the national symbol of Indonesia. The whole structure is intended to be iconic and boost tourism, and it draws heavy inspiration from nearby Singapore's Sentosa Island project. After the massive bird guardian is constructed, Jakarta Bay itself is intended to become a water reservoir enclosed inside that will eventually become a vast new source for fresh, clean water in the city. Jakarta's 13 rivers that all flow into the bay today are all planned to be cleaned up and cleared of pollution in order to keep their currently polluted outflows from transforming the bay into a stagnant cesspool. Meanwhile, the giant seawall itself is intended to become a new center of Jakarta's urban development, complete with housing, roads, and railways that connect back to the mainland that should all be capable of hosting a new population of 2 million people. The whole project is expected to carry a steep price tag of about $40 billion, and it hasn't come without controversies. For one thing, it will require the eviction of many nearby residents and the seizing of private lands along the coast, something that many locals depend upon for their livelihoods. Further, there are fears that if the wall were to ever fail because of something like a terrorist attack or some unforeseen black swan event, that the subsequent flooding would be catastrophic and probably end up destroying the city anyway in the future when sea levels are higher. This all means that the wall will end up being a critical security weak point that Indonesia would have to defend at all costs. Then there are many environmental concerns about building the wall to just heap on top of everything else. So with all of these negative factors going against Jakarta, and the obvious need to alleviate the growing population pressure and weight on the sinking city, the current leader of Indonesia, President Joko Widodo, made a bold announcement in 2019 to move the capital city away from Jakarta for the first time. And while the specifics of the exact location and plan are still in the stages of being figured out, things are moving pretty quickly. For one, we know that the general area of the new capital will be nearly 1,000 kilometers away from the current-day Jakarta, over on the island of Borneo, which happens to be the third largest island in the world, and it means that Indonesia's capital will be on an island shared with 2 other countries in the north, Malaysia and Brunei. Borneo is largely covered by rainforest and is sparsely populated, but it possesses several advantageous features for Indonesia's new capital city. First, the Indonesian government itself already owns a large part of the land over on their side of the border, making it easy to build a brand new planned capital city. Compared with Jakarta, the risk of disasters here are rather minimal, whether it be...
तो फ्रेंड ये था हमारा आज का रिएक्शन। अगर रिएक्शन पसंद आए तो हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें, वीडियो को लाइक करें, शेयर करें, एंड कमेंट में बताएं कि रिएक्शन कैसा लगा। तो मिलते हैं नेक्स्ट वीडियो के साथ। अल्लाह हाफिज।